Hi and welcome to Ask GMBN Tech, the weekly session about tech. If you've got any questions about tech, about removing your bottom bracket, about using a press fit retaining compound, about cutting down a pair of handlebars, anything goes, whatever. No one judges anyone, we just want everyone to do the right thing here. Get involved in the comments, use the hashtag Ask GMBN Tech. And if you haven't ever seen this show before and you're watching for the first time, well, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button. Go on, I know you want to. It means you get next week's show when it pops up without having to find it. We'll remind you that a question you might have asked today will be on next week's show. So get involved. Right, where are we starting this week then? Freedive RM. Is it possible to change the brake levers of my SRAM Code RSC? They come with a 2-finger lever, but I prefer to have a 1-finger lever like the ones Magura makes. Do you know, I confess I did look up this one because I know that there's compatibility issues between the levers, although within SRAM you can actually change those around, but some have got the dials and some don't have the dials on them. There's a company, I'm just throwing them on screen, called Freedom Coast. Now they make these levers. Unfortunately, they're not available for RSC yet, but they're beautiful. The 1-finger levers, CNC alloy, they just look so nice. Now what I'd suggest is dropping them a line and see when the RSC ones come in, because I couldn't find anything else online, but these just look so nice. And it reminds me of when there were companies like Straight Line that used to make levers for haze brakes way back, and there was various other companies as well. But really nice stuff. If anyone's got a set of them, or if anyone else has got any custom levers for SRAM brakes, let us know in the comments what they are and where you got them. Super helpful information to share. Good luck. Hope you managed to get something. Next is from Josh Savory. How about maintaining a steel full suspension bike like a Starling Cycles? The advantages and the disadvantages of steel frames. Okay, well, let's do this in reverse. Advantages and disadvantages. Well, steel frames, they're flipping strong. Yeah, so, and they also have, whether it's a full suspension bike or a hardtail bike, still has a very nice ride quality to it. So obviously every bike can be tuned by the designer, you know, by the thickness of the tubing, the style of tubing that they're doing, but steel is known for having a slightly, I'd say, springy sort of feel to it. If you compare it to alloy, that can have quite a harsh feel. Again, they can both be tuned to feel differently, but steel definitely has a feeling that people, when you find a steel bike you like, I know Anna still bats on about steel bikes all the time, she loves them. Not that I don't, but I know she especially loved the Kotick bike she once had, and you know, this obviously had an impact on her, the way it enabled her to ride. So yeah, disadvantages with steel frames typically tend to be a bit heavier. Not a problem with a hardtail bike. Might be a problem if your bike's like a 160mm travel enduro bike, where your bike's heavy enough anyway, you've got heavy wheels, heavy tyres, heavy componentry on there, and it might end up weighing as much as a downhill bike. So if that's a problem for you, then you might want to look at alloy or even things like carbon to try and reduce some weight. It's not just about picking a bike that rides well, it's got to suit you too. But that said, there's companies out there that make amazing enduro bikes and amazing anything out of steel. Check out Curtis Bikes. They're actually a local company to us based in the southwest. They make some of the nicest looking bikes of all time, and they're all steel. In fact, there's going to be a link to Curtis Bikes just down there. Probably the nicest fillet brazing you'll ever see on a bike. So nice. Right, then with maintaining one, don't really have to do much to them, just clean them like any other bike. The only thing with steel bikes being steel and not an alloy or a titanium alloy or anything else that tends to avoid corrosion is steel. Obviously it can corrode, you can get surface rust on it. Steel frames will have a lacquer of some kind on them, which is great and it will keep that at bay. But if you get moisture on the inside of your frame after washing your bike or storing outside or for whatever reason, you will develop some surface rust in there. You won't get to see it. So water displacing sprays on the inside of the frame, always a good idea because it's going to find its way out again. And you will see those little drain holes, so you can spray a bit in there just to make sure your frame is doing right on the inside. Right, next up from C3PO. I just did a quick service of my shock, a Fox X2, and I found the eyelet bushing quite stiff, even after disassembly, cleaning and lubrication. Am I losing performance? Is it worth upgrading to a Fox roller bearing kit or an Enduro needle bearing kit? A few things are handy. I mean, that one could just be worn. For example, you don't need to lubricate them, by the way. The whole point of those DU bushings that are in there is they're self-lubricating. It's not going to harm it, but you just don't need to do that. It's only going to draw in dirt and other stuff to it. It will depend on the layout of your frame and the shock configuration. So, for example, on my Canyon Spectral, the bushings that I've run in the shop, they really don't move that much. They don't rotate much because of the configuration of the frame. But on some bikes, if it's got a rocker, for example, driving a shock, that top one can actually move loads, so that it will wear out a bit more, and you might notice some stiffness. And then also, if you bend the shock hardware, or the pivot bolt in there, sorry, the shock mounting bolt, which isn't a sort of an unrealistic thing to do, that will affect how stiff it feels too. Now, yeah, okay, so asking about a Fox roller bearing kit. So something like this, basically, you can get these, an external bearing basically that pushes into the eyelet. They feel fantastic, but I don't think they're compatible with all frame configurations. So it will be down to the particular bike you've got. You haven't said, it's just the Fox X2 shock. And then the actual size of the shock body might limit where you can use those as well. There's definitely models you can and can't do that with. So if I was you, I'd probably speak to your nearest Fox service centre. I'm going to throw a link on the screen down there. In fact, it's going to be in the link underneath to international distributors. And so that will be a first port of call to contact them, because normally the distributor will be something to do with the service centre that's closest to you, and they'll be able to tell you what you can and cannot do with that one to improve it. But it could just be worn a bit. Good luck with that. Next up, from World Explored. Is it easy to change a cut fork tube to a long one? Is it safe afterwards? Do you know what? I've never done this, and I've heard of some great companies that do it. So I'm going to throw one on the screen now called RSF. They've got really good reviews, and I know people that have used them. I've asked about this before. So what World Explored is talking about is, for example, this is a bad example because this is a replaceable steerer tube because it's got bolts. But if you were to cut the steerer tube on your particular bike too short, and you buy a bike that's got a longer head tube on it, it renders it useless. So one way around that would be to buy a new CSU unit, so that's the crown, steerer, and those upper tubes all as one thing. They can be like really expensive to do that. So yes, it's well worth doing if you want to keep your fork. But there is another way, and you can get these tubes removed and a new one press fitted in place. Now, companies like RSF have got the equipment to do that. It's perfectly safe to do it. It's absolutely fine. And also, if your bike develops any creaking at the crown from the steerer tube that might not have been pressed in properly, or it might have been damaged in storage, whatever, they can get around that. And apparently they can do stanchion tubes as well. So if you've massively scratched a stanchion tube, chances are they can get that out and press another one in. I would say give it a try. And in fact, I'm going to give it a try because I'm curious. I'm going to get in touch with them just because I think it's a good thing to find out about and to see if it's actually worthwhile. But has anyone watching the show had a steerer tube or a stanchion tube replaced by a service similar to RSF? If you have, let us know how you got on. Let us know where you got it done as well. Always good to know, and share this stuff. Nice one. Yeah, and we'll come back to you once we've figured something out. Next up, from Jacob Hardiman. So I've got a Fox 36 Elite Performance 170mm travel, and I can't get it to go anywhere near full travel on a 2-meter huck to flat. Okay, so you're really trying. I'm only using about 140mm travel, and through rock gardens it feels too harsh, and I only use about 120mm travel despite actually having too much sag for my weight. This is a witch hunt. There's so many things here that this could be. The first thing you probably want to try and do is release the air out of the fork and just make sure that the fork actually slides up and down correctly. If it's catching anywhere, could be like a bushing has come out of place, or could be an actual fault on the inside with the damper itself. Something's locking it, something's not working right. There could be air trapped in the lowers on there. The transfer port could be blocked with grease, which does happen on forks, but I mean, normally that sort of puts the fork down. But it could still be a problem. They could just need a service. They could be old and knackered and dried up and having resistance in there, or you could be completely full up on volume spacers, which is going to hinder you using that travel. Really, there's a lot of things it could be there, to be honest. I've said this before to people, sometimes it would be real cool if you send us little video clips of your problems, so you could talk us through the problem, maybe show us. Something like this, if I could sort of see what's going on, I might be able to help a bit more. I can only guess, to be honest. But the fact it is moving a little bit, I think it could be a maintenance thing or a setup thing. Anyone else had the same problem? Get involved if you have. Failing that, to be honest, mate, get in touch again with a bit more detail. Try those things I suggested to see if any of those can help. But sorry, I can't be too specific. CRA 55 says, well, thanks Anna for answering my last question. I'll pass that on to her. I've got another question. Is the 31.8mm diameter handlebar about to die off? Recently I was shopping for a new stem at a local bike shop and was surprised to see they don't have many options left for 31.8mm stems. all the brand new bars they had for sale were 35mm. Should I keep my 31.8 bar and stem, or should I get one of the times and switch to 35? Well, you don't buy anything on anyone else's account. Don't be influenced by that. I hope they're not, because I can't stand 35mm, if I'm honest. I think it looks ugly, unless it's on an appropriate bike. Downhill bike, heavy-hitting enduro bike, e-bikes. You put skinny bars on an e-bike, it looks weird. I think it's kind of appropriate for what the bike is. I don't think you're ever going to see 35mm on many cross-country bikes, because they're far too slim and slender, and it just doesn't look right. And from what I gather as well, from when I last spoke to Renthal about this, I was like, you know, what's the difference between a 31.8 and a 35mm? And they were pretty much like consumer demand. They couldn't actually say in the ones that they developed for themselves there was any difference in strength or rigidity between the two. They were just saying there was an OE demand, that bike manufacturers making a bike with a big burly carbon head tube doesn't look right with the skinny bars on there. They wanted to have the bigger bar to match. So that's just one brand, of course. There are different variations in this. And over the years, I've ridden some 35mm bars that are so stiff that they were almost painful, and others that feel the same. So I've got nuke-proof 35 and 31.8 bars, and I don't think I could really notice the difference between them. Admittedly, they're on different styles of bikes. There's other things going into account there. But yeah, I mean, there's no need to upgrade to them. I mean, if your handlebars are carbon, you should probably replace them after a while anyway. And if you're going to do that, then that might be an opportunity to swap if you wanted to do that. But don't be swayed by trends as such. 31.8 is going to be here for a while, even if the market still starts speccing 35s on bikes. Next question from Thruxto_6. Imaginative, that one. I'm running a SRAM Guide T 1AC on the rear, and it is, I'm not even going to read out that word, doesn't enjoy it seems. Would it be better upgrading the disc to a 203, or would it be worth it to just get a better brake set on there? Slightly loose description, to be honest. There could be any number of things wrong with your setup. You could have glazed the pads, they could be contaminated, they could be badly broken in the first place, your rotor could be contaminated, your rotor could be warped. You might be a bit heavy for it, physically and in the style that you ride. Some riders can get away with 140s and 160s, some can only get away with 203s. Yeah, I mean, if you want a brake that just feels different and sharper, perhaps consider some other options. There's nothing wrong with the brake you have, and you can get the most out of it by cleaning it, bleeding it, putting fresh pads on it, all that stuff, and it will work really well. But if you're just set that it's not the one for you, then yeah, maybe look to other brands. Two particular brands that stand out to me in terms of if you want like outright sharpness and power. I made a video with Magura when I did a load of downhill runs in Spain, running 2-pot, 4-pot, you know, big rotors, small rotors, you know, all that sort of stuff to try and figure out what had more of an effect. And the Magura brakes, it actually took me a while to get used to them because they were so grabby, like the bite on them was just phenomenal, seriously powerful. And I know that's not to everyone's taste. The people that love them properly love them, and the people that have tried them and find it a bit much are like, no, I'll stick to Shimano's or whatever. And the other option is trick stuff. I've ridden trick stuff once and I felt like I couldn't ride a bike because they were so powerful. Of course, you will tune into that. But if you're jumping between bikes and they're on one of your bikes and not on the others, I think you're going to have a bit of a shock because that is a brake. I don't know what it is that makes them so powerful, but they feel totally different to everything else. Hey, maybe that's what you're looking for. They're not cheap though. And the last question this week is from Eric. He says, my bike came with a 175mm crank. Would there be a difference if I switched to 170mm? I would say barely. Like, I think I can notice the difference between a 170 and a 175, but if I start the ride in a 170 and I notice it, by the end of the ride, I won't notice it because you adapt to this stuff really quickly. Now, I mean, some people are suggesting a 165mm crank is no difference in terms of, you know, loss of power, and you've got the advantages of having more ground clearance, being able to pedal through stuff. But if I'm honest, I don't like a crank that short. I don't see the point in swapping if you've got something, unless you actually have physical problems like knee pain or hip pain from a crank that's too long, or the opposite. Just keep it until it's time to upgrade it, or if you break the crank or whatever. Anyone else out there gone for shorter cranks or had to go to longer cranks? Let us know down there. Thank you everyone for the great questions. Hopefully there's been something useful in here. Give us some feedback and we'll see you on another Ask GMBN Tech soon. Take care.